When the White House asked the National Academy of Sciences to assess anthropogenic warming in 1979, the Academy's letter revealed deep divisions. On one side, scientists like Roger Revelle, and on the other, economists such as game theorist and Nobel laureate Thomas Schelling and Yale economist William Nordhaus. While the former argued that it would be cheaper to treat symptoms rather than causes, and that migration could be a reasonable adaptation strategy for uninhabitable parts of the globe, the latter contended that new technologies would emerge as long as governments didn't interfere. So in what sense does this phase of denialism fit the pattern you call organized delay, or what Frizos calls climate procrastination, rather than outright denial? Finally, how did these economists use the logic of discounting to prevent substantial climate action?
This episode shows how denial and delay can't really be entirely separated. Sometimes people like to make a distinction, but I think it is a distinction that doesn't really hold up. Because for decades, going back to this report, as you said, that begins with work in 1979, one of the strategies that people have used is delay. It's to say, oh, we don't really have to work on it now. We can wait and see. We can afford to wait. We should wait because technology will develop that will solve the problem for us. So there's this techno-fideist component, this faith in technology to solve our problems, tied to free market economics, because the technological argument basically is saying if we just let the free market solve the problem, as opposed to having government programs to, say, facilitate the energy transition. And so we see this tension that comes up in the report that was chaired by Bill Nierenberg, where he and some of his colleagues, particularly the economists Tom Schelling and Bill Nordhaus, are saying, oh, don't worry, we can wait and see, we can adapt, we can migrate. And one of the things that was interesting about this report is it's the social scientists, the economists, who are saying we can wait and see. The natural scientists are all, with the exception of Nierenberg, saying, no, this is a really serious problem. If sea level starts rising, if the West Antarctic ice sheet starts to break up, and they're already talking about the West Antarctic ice sheet even in the 70s, which I found very fascinating, because it's a huge issue today, but they were already aware of it decades ago. Once the ice sheet begins to break apart, there's no going back. You can't then say, oh, okay, we're going to go back and fix it. No, you have to take steps now. And so they're drawing on physical science. They're drawing on, really basic science like thermodynamics to say you can't wait until it happens. Once it happens, it's too late to fix. But Nierenberg, and I would argue for political reasons, sides with the economists and says, oh, don't worry. And anyway, if people have to migrate, no big deal. People have always migrated. And I remember when I read that, being particularly appalled by that, because I feel that it's actually quite appalling for a physicist to reassure us, don't worry if people have to migrate, because of course any historian or sociologist could tell you, well, sure, people migrate, but there's tremendous pain and suffering associated with it. And if you think about mass migrations, you think about, in recent years, the migrations out of Syria, or going back to the end of World War II, the millions and millions of people who were displaced at the end of World War II, or people who have been displaced by disease and pandemics in the past. These are dreadful events. These are catastrophes in human history in which millions of people die and millions more suffer, or lose their livelihoods, or lose their identity, lose their language and culture. And to just say, in this totally cavalier way, oh, don't worry, people will migrate. And there's one line, I think he said, oh, people have migrated and they've taken their horses with them. It's sort of astonishingly cavalier and astonishingly disregarding of what we know about the pain and suffering associated with migration. But here's an example where you begin to see what could be a legitimate question about, well, how much time do we really have, turn into a political argument for delay. And so in subsequent years, Nordhaus has since come around. Now he's quite articulate on why we have to act on climate change, but it took him a really long time to get there. And so you really see the ways in which people discounted the problem and used this argument that it was okay that we could delay in a way as an argument for discounting the scientific evidence.
Could you just say one word about discounting quickly?
Oh, right. So discounting can be used in two senses, like a sort of general sense and a technical sense, but they're related. So in economics, discounting as a technical term refers to making a calculation in which you try to figure out, what is the cost of something in the future? So let's say something's going to cost me $1 million today, or the same problem would cost $1 million to fix in the future. It would be better to do it in the future because $1 million in the future is worth less to me than $1 million today. And you decide how much less. Maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10%, and that's your discount rate. So many economists have used this as an argument for why we can delay, on the theory that, well, it's better to just wait and do it later because it will cost us less because the value of the dollar will be discounted in the future. There's also, though, a kind of common sense use of the word discounting, which is to say, oh, it just doesn't really matter. I'm discounting your argument because I don't like it or I'm not persuaded by it. And so these guys are doing both. They're actually literally discounting the cost of climate change, but they're also metaphorically or generically discounting it by saying, oh, don't worry, we'll just adapt. And of course, both of these arguments are wrong because, again, they rely upon the assumption that things are not going to get worse, and especially the assumption that they will still be fixable. But what the physical scientists are saying is, no, these things may not be fixable. If the ice caps start melting, if the ice sheets start melting, this is irreversible. It cannot be fixed, and therefore, there should really be no discounting at all. In fact, if anything, the opposite. If a problem becomes unsolvable, then the cost becomes potentially infinite. And that's a strong argument for why we should act on it now.